you see the passing of time.
The crowds in St. Peter's Square are praying like mad for the Pope's life.
Where moments refuse to die.
This is a momentous hour in world history. This is the invasion of Hitler's Europe.
And where victory lives on.
Plenty of girls are being kissed by plenty of boys they don't know, and they do not care.
You can love it, hate it, embrace it, or turn away.
Lennon was shot to death late last night outside his apartment building.
But it is a past we all share.
Come on out here and give me a salute. Big Navy salute.
This is where yesterday has a home, where we wonder what it was like back then.
Go forward, knights, in safety.
And not too long ago.
His spirit must live on.
It's where history has its place and where the past comes alive. The History Channel.
The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan. These are countries that banded together and fought for global domination during the Second World War. We know about their leaders, Hitler, Mussolini, the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, men whose thirst for power led the world on a path to destruction. But what about the everyday guy, the common Axis foot soldier? Allied propaganda said he was an Aryan machine who thought himself part of the master race. Or he was a jungle madman, inscrutable and suicidal. Either way, he was perceived as a brainwashed foe, blindly following an evil leader toward our destruction. Aside from his nationality, his diet, and the color of his uniform, the Axis foot soldier had a lot in common with every other foot soldier in the history of time. Depending on his country of origin, the Axis foot soldier was destined to fight on every corner of the globe, from the smallest islands in the South Pacific to the vast steppes of Russia. He fought everywhere. He fought year-round, year after year, in the rain, in the heat, and in the cold. He fought in mud, in sand, in snow, and in swamps. There was nothing he didn't face, didn't suffer, didn't endure. This guy was tough. The ideal infantryman was between the age of 18 and 25. He was fit, full of stamina, and loaded with exuberance, and like most dog-faced soldiers, he was expected to be obedient and do everything he was told to do. Take the famous goose step, for example. This was the trademark of the Axis soldier. But, come on, let's be honest. It's an awfully strange way to get around, so why'd they do it? Hitler had actually borrowed the march from the Prussians, who introduced it in the mid-1800s. Now, the step was used strictly in parades and ensured that Hitler's men would be seen marching with a menacing sense of style. One thing's for sure, the Axis foot soldier was definitely in shape. The superiors made certain of it.
In Germany, the athletics was very much stressed. And usually in the morning, we had to run about a mile, mile and a half. Then there was calisthenics for about 20 minutes. And after calisthenics, we went into gymnastics. In the afternoon, there was field and track for 2 hours. Again, no exceptions. You had to be a long-distance runner, a short sprinter. You had to do a broad jump and triple jump, a high jump. All this was mandatory.
Most German foot soldiers began training for military service while they were still kids. That's what the Hitler Youth was all about.
You had to be in the Hitler Youth, which was actually the Boy Scouts under Hitler. He converted the Boy Scouts into Hitler Youth. There you received rifle instruction with small caliber 22 millimeter rifle shooting, you know, running through the woods, running and hiding and so on. The students were trained this way.
When you graduated from the Hitler Youth, guess what? You were a Lanzer in the Wehrmacht, which means a soldier in the German armed forces. For every Lanzer, training began with boot camp. Now here, new recruits received everything they needed to be a good soldier. This included a brand new uniform made of 30% rayon, 70% wool. The Lanzer accessorized his look with a bunch of fashionable items which no upstanding soldier could do without. And of course, he had all the necessary foundation garments. Buck naked, he was just another guy. But dress him up, and he was ready to fight. In the beginning of the war, the training was rigorous, lasting about 8 weeks. By the end of war, some German soldiers were lucky to get in a couple of jumping jacks before goose-stepping it to the front. The food in boot camp wasn't anything to write home about. Potatoes, a little meat, cabbage, and the world's heaviest bread. 2 slices were a full meal. After boot camp, the food got better. Fresh vegetables, sausage, more cabbage, potatoes, and of course, those same 2 slices of the world's heaviest bread. And the best thing about German food was it was often served hot. What's more, the officers ate the same food as the foot soldiers, also known as Frontschwein, or frontline pigs. Sharing meals together bonded the men to their leaders. As the old saying goes, fellows who eat together conquer the world together.
The squad became your family, and your squad leader, whether he was a sergeant or a lieutenant, became father in a lot of respects, looking out for the rest of the men. Even if he's only a couple of years older, he becomes dad.
The German army had several different kinds of divisions. There was the regular infantry division, motorized division, the armored division, the airborne or parachute division, and a mountain division. Each received specialized training. The mountain division, for example, was trained in the picturesque Alps. But this was no mountain holiday.
We had daily climbing marches with full gear up to 100 pounds, very steep mountains up and down in one day. And they put enormous amount of physical and psychological stress on us. This was very rough, but this really bonded us so intensely, also with the officers, that this paid off later on in the war.
After being trained in the Alps on snow and ice, many of the soldiers were sent to fight on mud and rocks in the southern part of the Soviet Union. Their mission was to seize and control the passes through the Caucasus Mountains between the Black and Caspian Seas. This was a very strategic spot for Hitler because of oil, lots of oil. So off they went, loaded with their climbing gear, to slog it out with the Ruskies in the muck. Few came home.
16 were still alive. For my group, I'm one of 4 who is still alive. Made it out through the war without being killed.
The average German foot soldier was issued a lot of basic equipment. He got a belt, cartridge pouches for ammunition, a shovel, bayonet, gas mask canister, canteen, mess kit, and a bread bag for the world's heaviest bread. Then there were his weapons. But the one weapon which identifies the German soldier of World War II more than any other is the Schmeiser, or machine pistol 40.
Now, this was a very important weapon in the history of weapons. It's the first weapon which doesn't have any wood in it. It's plastic or it's steel. It has no machined part. It's all stamped metal and welded. It has a folding butt. Which gives you a very compact weapon when you're climbing into a vehicle, as many of the German soldiers were. So, here we have the magazine, which contained 30 rounds of pistol ammunition, 9mm, the same as their pistol used. In went the magazine, and when you fire it, you can empty that in a matter of 2 seconds. Terrific firepower, very easily carried, cheap to manufacture, and as I say, it is the weapon which identifies the German soldier of World War II beyond any other.
To go along with his machine pistol, some German foot soldiers also carried a highly efficient machine gun, probably the best machine gun developed in the war, the German MG-42. It had a great rate of fire, good range, and was very effective. Then, there was the weapon with the innocent-sounding name, the potato masher. Don't be fooled, it wasn't used for fixing dinner. The potato masher was, in fact, a hand grenade on a stick.
The German stick hand grenade, as they call it, which had been developed in World War I and is almost classic offensive grenade in that you can get more leverage to throw it with the stick, and this is high explosive.
Altogether, the German foot soldier carried about 80 pounds worth of gear, food, ammo, and weapons into 6 long and bloody years of combat. And for this exciting privilege, he was paid about $45 a month.
The German soldier fought for the greater glory of the fatherland. He didn't fight for General this or General that, and he fought bloody well, and he was a tenacious enemy. Believe me, he was a tenacious enemy.
When this tenacious enemy was unleashed on the world in the late 1930s, those who stood in his path were brought to their knees, and those who fought back were in for a long, bloody struggle. The average German foot soldier never knew where he was going, he just went where he was told. And that could be anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. He went to Poland in the fall, he went to France in the spring, North Africa in the summer, and Russia for the long, cold winter. Nice travel agent, that Hitler. During 6 years of war, the German foot soldier marched and fought his way across an enormous portion of the globe. In September 1939, he made his lightning attack on Poland. This ignited the war. Then, in 1940, he conquered Western Europe. First, he marched through Denmark and Norway. Then, went around that impregnable Maginot Line in France via the Netherlands and Belgium, and then went right into the heart of Paris. Then, in early 1941, the Lanzer was off to North Africa by way of Yugoslavia and Greece. In June of '41, he got a trip to Russia. Because of the way the German army was set up, it was entirely possible for a single German foot soldier to visit all these exciting places.
One of the romantic images, if you want to call it that, about being in the military is being able to travel, being able to see the world, and certainly the Germans qualify. You could have been in Poland, in France, down in Africa, out in Russia. You could have been literally through almost all of Europe during World War II and have the badges and insignia to prove it.
When the German army invaded Russia, morale was at an all-time high.
I've studied a lot of film of the German army advancing into Russia in 1941. Especially the northern drive up through the Baltic states. And I have never seen troops as confident, fit, competent as those. They are the most tails-up army you've ever seen in your life. Nothing could stop them. And nothing did stop them.
Acting like Napoleon, Hitler sent his great army to fight the Russians on the enemy's home turf. It was a bloody mismatch at first, then the Russians called out their best ally, Old Man Winter. It wasn't that the Germans didn't have winter equipment and supplies, they just didn't have it when they needed it. So when winter comes early in 1941, the German army was caught with their shorts on. The Russian front was enormous, stretching from near the Arctic Circle to the Black Sea, about 1,500 miles. Now, you may think this highly advanced German army was able to move through Russia in trucks and tanks and trains, but no, they did it the old-fashioned way. They marched.
When you talk of the German army, you immediately think panzers, tanks, vehicles, relentless mass rolling forward. Not quite true. Quite a lot of the German army was still horse-drawn in 1939 and stayed horse-drawn throughout the war.
This meant marching hundreds, even thousands of miles. Wolfgang Seipt, who trained in Austria, was sent to fight in the Caucasus Mountains. He got there mostly on foot.
The route to the Caucasus was from here. Must be tough, Minsk. Down here. All the way to Rostov. And from there with buses and then walking all the way into the Caucasus Mountains here. And from there then over to Maikop and Tuapse. And we're supposed to go over the mountain passes, which were highly fortified and defended, and go around them and take him from behind, and then go down to the train tracks here, the rails, which is the connection to Baku, and at the oil fields. From here, where the battalion marched, till here is 2,800 miles. And this is within 1 year. I figured it out.
One year of marching, one pair of boots. Along the way, the soldiers, like every other army in the history of the world, supplemented their rations by foraging for food.
If you were marching along and you were feeling hungry and a chicken walked across your path, well, it was tough on the chicken. But you would not deliberately shoot the farmer in order to take his chickens.
Believe it or not, the average German soldier was reasonably well behaved on foreign soil. He was under strict orders not to steal from the local population, but while it may be argued that the Wehrmacht was for the most part an honorable army, the atrocities committed by Hitler's fanatical SS and Gestapo undid any goodwill that was forged between the German soldiers and the people they conquered. Between 1940 and 1945, millions of Jews, gypsies, and other non-combatants were uprooted, sent to concentration camps, and put to death.
The whole issue of whether the average German soldier knew what was going on in the death camps and the atrocities being committed is very sensitive, because we'd like to believe that they did know. You know, they can't deny it. They had to know something was going on. And yet, at the same time, the fact is that when you talk to Americans who are in the service, and even though they have a general idea sometimes of what's going on, a lot of the effort being made by officers is to keep your men in the dark. If they don't know things, they can't give it away if they're captured. So it's reasonable to assume that a lot of German soldiers were not aware of it. And a lot of them probably would have been very appalled and in a very bad dilemma, because they want to fight for their country, they want to fight for their homeland, and yet it's doing something that is obviously hideous.
As the murder of innocent civilians dragged on day after day and month after month, the Wehrmacht continued fighting on two fronts. The German army battling along the eastern front, the Russian soldier presented an unrelenting foe.
I don't think the German soldier was particularly chauvinistic about anybody, except perhaps the Russian. And that wasn't chauvinism, that was self-preservation. He knew if he didn't kill the Russian was going to kill him.
From 1941 to 1944, a large portion of the German army was sent to the Russian front. For those who fought there, the reality of war was terrifying.
And I found out very fast on the first day, wow, all the war is about, if I shoot faster, I'm the guy who stays alive. No matter what the reason is for the shooting, you shoot at each other. It was very, very devastating to me to realize that my past life feeling is gone. Das was pure survival from now on.
As bad as it was for the Germans in the Caucasus Mountains, it was far worse for those who got caught in the siege of Stalingrad. In September 1942, Hitler sent 500,000 of his soldiers to take the city. By February of 1943, the Germans had suffered 300,000 casualties. The rest surrendered.
They just froze to death. They were exhausted, they sat down, fell asleep, and that was it, frozen. So many died already there. They got nothing to eat and to drink for 3 weeks. How they survived, you have to listen to them. They sometimes drank their own urine when they still had some. It was just awful.
In the end, Stalingrad would prove to be the turning point of the war. But the big picture hardly mattered to the common foot soldier who struggled against all odds just to stay alive. And as the long, cold winter dragged on in the east, another enemy, America, had joined the Allied forces in the west. If there is one thing that identifies a German foot soldier, it's his helmet, the distinctive M1935. It weighed about 2 pounds, came in 5 basic sizes. Hopefully one fit your head. But even if it didn't, it had a lot of other uses. It could be a soup bowl, a wash basin, or even a comfy pillow. And when the bullets started flying, it was your best friend. Throughout history, soldiers of all stripes and nationalities have found ways to alleviate their worst enemy, boredom. The German foot soldier was no different. Like every other soldier in the war, he enjoyed many light-hearted moments. The snow-covered mountains provided occasional relief from the perils of war. German soldiers would throw on their coats, strap on their skis, and hitch a ride with the cavalry. In North Africa, German foot soldiers in the famed Panzer divisions often enjoyed games of soccer. They liked it so much that some say they even challenged the British to a soccer game one Sunday during a ceasefire. There in no man's land, they reportedly played for about an hour. The next day, the war resumed. There was also time to relax in southern Russia, where German troops befriended the local population. Because most of these people were not ethnic Russians, they regarded the Soviets as evil, and oddly enough, the Germans as liberators.
We had a good time with these people. And the population started to come and visit with us, especially young girls came. We had to show them the pictures from our brothers and sisters, or girlfriends, or wives. And we had to sing our hit songs at this time then, and they were singing their songs, and we had a good time.
But fraternizing with the enemy could be bad for your health. In many villages, the locals kept their distance from the Germans in fear of Soviet reprisals.
The one who fraternized with the German troops were put on the wall and shot, you know. So that was dangerous for these people.
When faced with entertaining himself, the German foot soldier still managed to have plenty of fun. This included singing and dancing, and if there was a shortage of women, no problem. These soldier boys were more than willing to dress up. The German soldiers also made themselves right at home while living among their enemies. They helped with the harvests, slaughtered an occasional calf, and even sampled some of the local products.
We bought from the people their liquor. The local liquor was always better than the bottled one because much stronger. It was dangerous stuff. You could fill your lighter fluid and use it to light your cigarette with.
No matter what precautions were taken, soldiers learned to expect the unexpected. Because of the conditions, mud, rain, dirt, weapons often jammed, leaving the men to their own devices.
Suddenly in front of me stands a man, big, with the red bandana over the steel helmet and pointing a machine pistol, but over my head. And I pull my trigger from my machine. He was about 6 feet away from me. It was a steep incline. I pull the trigger and the machine gun jams. That was the most frightening point in the whole war, because I was now at his mercy. So I took a rock and threw him right, the rock is about this size, right in the face. We were defending ourselves by throwing rocks. We had no ammunition anymore, nothing to shoot with.
However absurd, this business was lethal. And one fact was certain on the Russian front: you didn't want to be captured. It's estimated that 3 million German soldiers were captured by the Soviets. Only 90,000 came home.
The saddest moment is when you can't help. When you have a comrade being hit and he is still alive, to crawl forward and try to retrieve him without being hit yourself. You actually give your life for him, to give him comfort. And then you drag him back, and maybe in the evening when he dies, you have to bury him. Another very sad occasion. But the foot soldier has to do it all himself. You take your shovel out, you know, your spade, and then you dig a grave. Somebody says a prayer or sings a church song, you know. And then that is a little cross, steel helmet on top. This is the life of the foot soldier.
After June of 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe, the Nazi Third Reich was breathing its last gasp. The average German foot soldier was no longer young, strong, and healthy. He was often just a boy, maybe 16 years old, or an old man of 60. In the last decisive battle for Europe, the Battle of the Bulge, the retreat of the German foot soldier was a pathetic sight indeed. They had finally lost the will to fight. Many just surrendered.
German soldiers accepted the notion that if they were taken by the British and Americans, they would be treated decently and in some cases well. And on the other hand, Germans taken prisoner by the British or Americans were sometimes disappointed when their first meal didn't include steak and eggs.
Germany's unconditional surrender took place on May 7, 1945. What was arguably the world's strongest and most feared army had been soundly defeated.
The enduring legacy of a German infantryman is probably something along the lines of a professional, probably the best soldier in World War II, who was used in a very bad cause. It's too bad that men that fought so well and were so well trained had to lose. But at the same time, thank God they did.
Germany's partners in the Axis alliance, Italy and Japan, fielded two polar opposite infantries, while the Japanese foot soldier fought to the death in the jungles of the Far East. The Italian foot soldier was a reluctant warrior at best in the sands of North Africa. Fighting alongside the German Wehrmacht in World War II was the ambivalent Italian foot soldier. Was he brave? Look at his heritage. The Roman Empire ruled. Did he admire his leader? Absolutely not. He thought Mussolini was a buffoon. The war is war, and when sent to the front, he obeyed orders when he felt like it. The biggest problem with the Italians was that they didn't want to fight. They had no interest whatsoever in the war.
The average foot soldier was a peasant. He was illiterate. His officers disregarded him, treated him poorly, and he just did not want to be in this war. The main thing that you hear about over and over again when the Allies talk about the Axis soldier is that they respected the Germans and they respected the Japanese, but there was no respect for the average Italian soldier.
In addition to their poor leadership, the Italian foot soldier was poorly trained and loaded down with lousy equipment. The rifle issued to the Italian mountain troops was made in 1898. The main problem with this ancient weapon was that it was too long. But when the Italian soldiers complained about it, Il Duce, the great Generalissimo Mussolini himself, came up with a novel solution. Let's just saw 20 inches off the barrel, now it's shorter. Ooh, brilliant, huh? Despite the fact that the Italian foot soldier was poorly equipped, trained, and motivated, there were elements of its armed forces that did really well, that showed not only bravery, but skill on the battlefield. This was especially true in Africa. In 1935, prior to the start of the Second World War, the Italians invaded Ethiopia. In a matter of months, they overran the Africans and claimed victory. For the Italians, this would be their first and last moment of glory under Mussolini. After that, it was all downhill. In November of 1936, Italy joined with Germany and Japan to form the Axis powers. When war broke out 3 years later, the Italians were faced with a far more daunting challenge on the battlefield. When the British Army took on Il Duce's forces in North Africa, the Italians fell like a house of cards. Their only salvation was the arrival of German reinforcements under the direction of the famed Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. As a rule, Axis foot soldiers did not worship their generals. Rommel was the exception. Under his command, German and Italian troops excelled in North Africa. Rommel's army included an elite light infantry division. To call them snake eaters is fairly accurate. They dined on anything that moved. In their company, no creature was safe. The average Italian foot soldier had little in common with his German counterpart. This made them rivals in the field and unlikely allies. Still, the Italians fought well under German leadership.
They at least tried to fight. They would take objectives. They would work with the Germans, and it was an amazing transformation of them. But take away that element, or take away the leadership that the Germans provided them, and they just collapsed.
The biggest problem facing the Italian foot soldier was that he had no motivation to fight. Mussolini was transparent, a total glory hog, and the average Italian soldier saw no glory in senseless bloodshed. He hated Mussolini because Il Duce was a prima donna, and he hated his officers because they were prima donnas. So why put himself in the line of fire?
There was an expression among a lot of the Italian soldiers, the average guys out on the rifle line, that they believed that their officer corps was rotten, literally.
Most Italian soldiers resented their officers. They regarded them as old men who looked good in their World War I uniforms, but did nothing to earn their World War II paychecks. The officers looked more like characters in a bad musical comedy than responsible leaders. They also got better food, and more of it. And they didn't share it like the German officers did. As a consequence, the legacy of the Italian foot soldier is that of the guy who was looking for his best chance to get out. That meant surrender. In Africa, he surrendered to the British or the Americans. In Sicily, when the Americans landed and the British landed, the same thing again. The most surprising thing about the Italian foot soldier is that he willingly gave up on his home soil, Sicily and Italy. And he didn't just surrender, he often aided the Allies.
Most Italian soldiers were overjoyed to be out of the war, so once they surrendered, they were more than willing to help the Americans. There's the old joke about, the Italian soldiers would find Italian Americans that they were cousins with or knew somebody back home and would try to get sent to America.
In truth, the Italians were much happier in the company of Americans. In 1943, when Allied forces invaded Italy, most of the Italian army surrendered and spent the remainder of the war in prison camps. But Europe wasn't the only place where Axis soldiers were taking on the Allies. In dense jungles throughout the Pacific, another nation was at war, fighting to the death in some of the most savage battles the world has ever known. Half a world away, the third member of the Axis powers was fighting to conquer the Far East. During World War II, about 6 million soldiers fought in the Japanese Imperial Army. Most of them were conscripts, 19 to 45 years old, drafted for the duration of the war. In return, they were paid 10 yen a month, about $2. 8 yen were automatically sent home to their families. 1.5 yen were put aside for savings. That left the average Japanese foot soldier with 1/2 yen for spending money. That's about a nickel a month. At least it didn't weigh him down. Just like their German allies, the Japanese trained their children to be soldiers, boys and girls alike. This rigid education prepared the youth of Japan to be loyal and trustworthy soldiers. Once drafted into the army, the Japanese conscript went to boot camp. There, his training lasted 4 to 8 weeks. In the early years of the war, it was extensive. By the end, very limited. Basic training conditioned him to fight, taught him how to use his weapons, and most important, told him why he was fighting and why he should win. Central to this was the ancient warrior tradition of the samurai. He was expected to show valor in battle, never despise an inferior enemy, nor fear a superior one. He was commanded to obey all orders because ultimately they came from the emperor. He was told to be faithful and righteous, and above all else, to be loyal. Duty, he was told, was weightier than a mountain, and death lighter than a feather. The Japanese foot soldier was destined to fight in one of two main theaters of the war. In Manchuria, now a part of present-day China, or in the South Pacific. If he had his choice, he preferred China, where his chances of survival were much greater. Few returned from the South Pacific. In combat, the Japanese soldier was daring in attack and stubborn in defense, willing to fight to the death.
To the Japanese, the greatest disgrace was to be taken a prisoner. Being killed, nothing. To the greater glory. Wonderful. You've done it for the emperor, great. But you're taken prisoner. Your family would disown you. Your ancestors would rotate in their graves.
More specifically, if a Japanese soldier died in battle, his family would receive a lifetime pension from the government. But if he was captured, nothing. The typical Japanese foot soldier wore a basic khaki-colored uniform that stressed utility rather than show. He had a pair of lace-up boots for cold weather and sneaker-like canvas shoes for those days in the tropics. His gear included a standard issue watch, mess kit, 2 bottles of water, a gas mask, haversack, a high-crown steel helmet, field cap, and a versatile piece of canvas, which could be used as a tarp, a cape, or a mosquito cover. He might also have a 1,000-stitch belt, given him for luck by a loved one. All this gear weighed less than 10 kilograms, 25 pounds. To the average Japanese foot soldier, this was a piece of cake. And speaking of food, his diet was mostly rice and water. Sometimes he got fish and vegetables, usually greens, and that was it. Simple fare for the simple man. But there was nothing simple about the way he fought.
Now, the Japanese soldier, his basic weapon was this, the Arisaka rifle. This is actually a carbine, short model, but it was preferred by the Japanese troops because they were not very large stature. It's a very primitive, if you like, bolt-action rifle. When you compare this to the American Garand, that's how it works. You have to open it manually, close it manually, and pull the trigger.
Then there was the bayonet. Like the samurai sword, it was revered by the Japanese soldier as a sacred weapon. Hand-to-hand combat was considered the most glorious act of battle. Somewhat less glorious were the mundane chores the Japanese soldier was required to carry out for the benefit of his officers. This meant doing their laundry, cooking, and cleaning, basically being a wartime butler. And none complained. It was part of the samurai tradition. Typically, a Japanese soldier who was sent to defend an island in the South Pacific stayed there. He was never relieved. Conditions were miserable, hot, wet, rampant with disease, and the fighting was desperate. It was here that the Japanese fought face to face and island to island against the Allies. For the American GIs, it was an eye-opening experience.
Japanese were really very tough. They had a different, mindset, and they were fighting for a different reason and a lot of things like that than we were. I had to give them grudging admiration for the fact that they would fight to the bitter end, but in giving them this grudging admiration, we also hated their guts. We really got to where we didn't really consider them human, and they probably thought the same about us.
From 1931 until 1945, the Japanese army battled for control of the Far East. Whether they celebrated victory or suffered defeat, they remained true to their centuries-old traditions.
Japan had just over 6 million soldiers. 1,795,000 were killed. 93,000 were taken prisoner. Now that tells you an awful lot of the morale of the Japanese army.
Really, it was a war of no quarter in the Pacific because they wouldn't give up, we couldn't give up, and so it just was continually battling until the last Japanese gave up or somehow we overcame them.
In the end, the Japanese tradition of fighting to the death became one of the reasons that the U.S. took drastic measures to end the war. When the Japanese finally surrendered in August of 1945, many of their foot soldiers refused to believe it. Their rigid indoctrination simply did not allow them to accept defeat.
Well, first we thought it was a lie, but then we started realizing, yes. And then we read about that, and it's Hiroshima, it was bombed, and it says nothing could live in there for 75 years. I said, what? We could understand, just reading that. And I said, God. And I said, well, we better see if we could get back to Japan,
But nothing could have prepared the Japanese foot soldier for what greeted him when he returned home. Japan was a wasteland. Once thriving cities had been reduced to rubble.
Me and my friend got on the train, and we went through Hiroshima. And we looked at Hiroshima and said, oh, now I know why Japan lost the war, when you saw that Hiroshima all bombed.
With the defeat of the Germans and the Italians in Europe and Africa, and the surrender of the Japanese in Asia, the dark days of Axis tyranny were over. The Axis foot soldier returned home, their cause lost, their countries in ruin. Although they fought for world domination, they shared a common bond with the men who had battled on the sides of the Allies. Each had taken part in the bloodiest conflict in history, a conflict that had plunged the world into darkness and defined an entire generation.